lost religion in our country. All Americans need a Bible in their home, and I have many. It's my favorite book. It's a lot of people's favorite book. This Bible is a reminder that the biggest thing we have to bring back America and to make America great again is our religion. Religion is so important. It's so missing, but it's going to come back, and it's going to come back strong, just like our country is going to come back strong. I'm proud to endorse and encourage you to get this Bible. We must make America pray again. And I think you all should get a copy of God Bless the USA Bible now and help spread our Christian values with others. There you have it. Let's make America pray again. God bless you, and God bless the USA.
God bless the USA. Make America great again. Make America pray again by bringing back religion into politics. Really, this is the same thing that has happened in time past. There's nothing new under the sun. And it's interesting because a lot of it sounds good from an outset, but the reality is that we have to be very careful with the words that we use. Let's make America pray again. Not only the words that we use, but the motives that we have. And are we pushing something? Are we pushing our religions on other people? Are we going to force people to pray again? Because this has been done in time past, and this is nothing new under the sun. This is a picture of what happened in the time of Nebuchadnezzar when he tried to force everybody to bow down and worship a golden image, which he set up in the midst of a field. Let's make Babylon pray. Let's make Babylon bow down. Let's make the nation bow down. And that was Christian nationalism. And those who don't want to, maybe they're against our principles, maybe they're against our morals, and maybe they need to be met. But Steve Bannon tells us that Christian nationalism is an unstoppable force. And so it's coming, and I think a lot of people can see that it's an unstoppable force. It's a very common term that is being widely used right now. And a lot of people, a lot of articles on nationalism, a lot of articles on Christian nationalism, but what is nationalism? Well, nationalism is when you have everybody together doing one thing. Remember, nationalism was happening in Babylon when they tried to get everybody to bow to their image, which they set up in the plain of Dura. But nationalism really is a smaller scale of globalism. And they're not much different. They all take away the rights of the individual, which is individualism, which is important. And not a lot of people understand where your rights come from. Where do your rights come from? Well, we'll get to that in a second. Just consider this, though. In John chapter 11, verse 50, it said, regarding Jesus Christ when he was crucified, Caiaphas said, consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. In other words, Caiaphas was a nationalist. He believed that the nation, in order to save the nation, that they had to kill Jesus Christ. And so that was what they did. They tried to get Jesus out of the way in order to save their nation. You know, this is something that a lot of people don't understand. It has to do with human rights. Do rights come from your government? Do rights come from God? How about, do the rights come from your Constitution? Maybe it's not a piece of paper that gives you your rights. I believe that rights are God-given. The Constitution only sets forth those rights which are given by God. And government is not supposed to infringe on those rights, are not supposed to step on those rights, and they're not supposed to outlaw any of those rights, which would include freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom to bear arms. And if these rights are infringed, normally it is when government goes bad and government takes control. This is Representative Boebert, and she says regarding church and state, she's tired of separation of church and state junk. That those who oppose separation of church and state are the ones in the way, basically. I want you just to hear this. This is not just one person saying this, but there are many in this movement saying the same things.
Intended it, and I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
You'll notice that the attitude here is not the attitude of a Christian. This is a very angry person who's about to, step on the toes of somebody who steps in her way. And she is not going to take any numbers or names or anything like that. This is not Christ behind this movement. This is a very common belief that there is no separation of church and state in the Constitution. And she's not the only one to espouse this idea, but there are many espousing these ideas. Now, on the other side of the coin, however, there is people who are saying that our rights come from our government.
We hear words like Christian nationalism, like the New Apostolic Reformation. These are groups that you should get very very schooled on, because they have a lot of power in Trump's circle. And the one thing that unites all of them, because there's many different groups orbiting Trump, but the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God. The problem with that is that they are determining men, men are determining what God is telling them. And in the past, that so-called natural law is, it's a pillar of Catholicism. Catholicism, for instance, has been used for good in social justice campaigns. Right. Martin Luther King evoked it in talking about civil rights. But now you have an extremist element of conservative Christians who say that this applies specifically to issues including abortion, gay marriage, and it's going much further than that.
It's not wrong to believe that your rights come from God. Your rights do come from God, and they're to be protected by the government. The government is to stand to protect those who would come against those who have God-given rights. And the problem can be when, as she said, your laws come from God, and we're going to interpret what those laws are. And that is dangerous. That is Christian nationalism, and that is something that can be dangerous. However, she did apologize for her comments regarding Christian nationalism, and she believes that rights as Americans and as all human beings don't come from any earthly authority. However, there was a video that was made, and I'll come to that in a second, but this is what's happening in America. There are numerous articles, numerous things being written and talked about regarding Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is everywhere right now. As it says, Trump allies to prepare to infuse Christian nationalism in his second administration. And it says below, Christian nationalists in America believe that the country was founded as a Christian nation and that Christian values should be prioritized through government and public life. As the country has become less religious and more diverse, Vaught has embraced the idea that Christians are under assault and has spoken of policies he might pursue in response. Now, I'm going to talk about some of these policies that might be coming because, as Jared Longshore says in this video, we're all Christian nationalists now. There are some policies, some doctrines, some teachings that might come against the true religion of Christianity. And maybe they might be pushing Christian nationalism when the reality is that Christian nationalism is completely against what God would have us actually believe.
A clip from MSNBC went viral last week in which Heidi Przybyla of Politico laid her finger on the perceived hallmark of Christian nationalism. Quote, "The one thing that unites all of them as Christian nationalists," she explained, "is that they believe our rights as Americans don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God." Now, this is the kind of moment for which we thank God. It is wonderfully clarifying. The first thing that we must grasp with both hands, and I mean grasp it, hold tight, shake it around a bit, and fasten it down with a couple of lag bolts, is that the time for dancing in the middle is over. We are all Christian nationalists now.
Now, before I get to the next part, it is important to understand where these people are coming from. We are all Christian nationalists now. In other words, we're going to enforce our religion on the public, and this is how it's going to look. And I want you to hear the next part.
Now, Heidi, don't you know that our nation has a long tradition of common sense people acknowledging that our rights come from the triune God? Don't you know that in 1892, the Supreme Court, in a case called Holy Trinity versus the United States, stated that we are a Christian nation? Haven't you heard that the Treaty of Paris, which ended the war for independence and officially recognized the United States as an independent nation, opened with these words, quote, "In the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity"? And Heidi, has it escaped your attention that 50 of the 55 men present at the Constitutional Convention were Orthodox Christians? No, you can't picture that at all. For that matter, you can't picture more than about 3 people right of center informing Heidi of this perfectly sound history. Welcome to the New World, my friend. Here is what we are going to do about it. We will not, we must not, let the left define any more terms, not even Christian nationalism.
Regarding being under the Holy Trinity, some of us may not agree with the Trinity doctrine. And so what if we deny the doctrine of the Trinity as absolute truth in the Bible? What if we believe it came from ancient Babylon? What if we believe that it was something that was not ordained onto Christianity these days? Is it possible that maybe laws are about to be made in regards to those things? And this is nothing new. It's something that's happened in time past. The Justinian Code in 538 AD. The very first words of the Justinian Code were concerning the most exalted Trinity and the Catholic faith, and that no one should dare to publicly speak against it. Well, many were killed in those days, including entire nations being uprooted and destroyed because they failed to accept the Trinitarian view. They did not accept the doctrine of the Trinity.
And come to think of it, if our civil rights come from God, then maybe we owe him something. She stepped out of line. She stopped marching in the silly parade we have been marching in for too long. That parade is the one where we pay vague lip service to a vague deity about some vague rights that we get from him. Poor Heidi essentially said, "But guys, if we get our rights from the Christian God, doesn't it follow that we owe him some kind of allegiance? My goodness, if we say our rights come from him, we may need to get our laws from him, our leaders from him, our customs from him, and where will it stop?" With Heidi cracking up the party this way, her leftist friends can't do anything but agree with her, denounce that rights come from God, and haul Russell Moore off to the recalibration camps for his Christian nationalist ways. Consider the logic. If our civil rights come from the triune God, does it not follow that civil allegiance must be paid to him? We might structure our civil affairs such that on the one day in 7, which God has deemed holy, we rest from our work and worship him. This civil and public acknowledgement should certainly be formalized in our governing documents. How could we do any other if our rights come from him? But it is not going to stop there. If our rights come from God, then won't it follow that our laws must come from him? It would be quite strange if our rights came from God, but then the law of our land paid no regard to what he has revealed. I dare say that the God-given rights might collide with the laws of our land if those laws went rogue and didn't pay attention to the rights giver.
Our rights come from God, therefore our laws come from God, so therefore we should keep one day in 7 holy unto God. The question is, though, as Heidi Prisbilla put it, what about if your interpretation of the Bible is wrong? For instance, maybe the Catholic Church changed the 7th-day Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, as they admit to throughout history, and this is a proven and documented fact, a well-documented fact that anybody can research in less than a 20-second Google search. So the problem with this is that what day do we keep? Do we keep the official day of the sun or the sun god? Or do we keep the Sabbath day that was recognized and is still recognized by the Jews today? Do we give that to Caesar to determine? And also, considering that it is a moral aspect of the law, do we give it to Caesar to determine? It's like giving to Caesar the commandment of adultery. Because if you look on a woman and lust after her, you've committed adultery already in her heart. So therefore, we have a judge, Caesar, who's going to judge whether or not we've looked on a woman and lusted after her, or we have a judge who's going to tell us whether we've hated our brother, because hatred is murder, and therefore the penalty for that is death. But should someone ask for forgiveness on the way to the courthouse, he should automatically be forgiven, because God has said, if a brother asks for forgiveness, we are to forgive even as he is forgiven. Should we make a difference between moral law and civil law and give that which is moral to God and allow Caesar to dictate what is civil, which protects against incivility? And also Caesar is given to protect your right to life, liberty, and property. We should be careful what we give to Caesar, because he might redefine it just as he did with marriage.
Moreover, if our rights come from the triune God, then does that not mean that we would need leaders from him as well? What good will it do if our rights are from God but our leaders are not? Right about now is when some mid-management evangelical leader comes along and puts his hand around a young Johnny who is reading this post. This young man is thinking that the logic thus far holds, but his boss at the seminary says something like, "Listen here, this is sounding a bit too theocratic, dogmatic, and nationalistic." Stringing together a few more scary words, he adds, "Our rights come from God indeed, but our laws come straight out of the old noggin here. Our leaders come from the voting booth. That's just how it goes. Fret not. If these leaders get out of line, we will take care of them in the next election. When we do, we will get some sane men, some competent Turks, as they say, back into the halls of power who will restore sanity, repeal the bad laws, and get some better ones on the books. That is, that's at least how things used to go." But thanks to COVID, both young Johnny and his superior have spent a good deal of time thinking through Romans 13. All of the questions are not answered yet, but there is a clear consensus forming around this much. 1. Civil authorities are ministers of the triune God, Romans 13, verse 6. 2. They have been appointed by God, for, quote, "there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God," Romans 13, verse 1. 3. They must not be a terror to good works, but to evil. Romans 13, verse 3. The implications are not difficult to trace.
Romans 13:6 makes no mention of the triune God. Romans 13:1 talking about the powers that be that are ordained of God, and Romans 13:4 talking about the sword and the executioner and wrath being executed against those who do evil. Evil obviously is incivility, and that is what Caesar is to protect against. He's not to protect against those who might not worship the Trinity or don't keep the seventh day holy. That is not incivility. That is a right to believe what you want to believe, and no law is to be made with respect to religion. That is the very first amendment of the Constitution, and that Constitution is to be upheld. And the reason that it's to be upheld is because of what happened during the Dark Ages. I'll come back to that in 1 second.
In the name of some vague civic theism, do we really want to argue that unbaptized men who care not for God's revelation are fit to be his ministers? Do we really want to claim that a man can serve as a servant of God, establish laws that he approves of, and execute his wrath while publicly and plainly paying him no reverence? You know Grandma's not going to buy that nonsense. Don't make her wash your mouth out with soap.
So again, civil leaders, policemen, and everything like that are to be ordained of God. They are to follow God's law, but that means that they are again to protect against incivility. They are not to force people to worship a certain way, and we've seen this in many instances throughout the Bible where worship has been forced by civil leaders, and these civil leaders have been called to repentance because they stepped out of the line where God calls them. They are called to be ministers of God. They are to protect those who've been mistreated and unfairly treated. However, they are not to be used to enforce worship of a deity. How about worship of a golden image, as Nebuchadnezzar did? Or how about forcing people to put things in their body that is contrary to their faith, as Nebuchadnezzar did? Or how about throwing Daniel in the lion's den because he wouldn't pray a certain amount of times a day? We must make America pray again, right? And Daniel was thrown into a lion's den because he didn't pray the way that the king said to pray. How about when these civil authorities go down the wrong path? Perhaps if we did some research of history, washing out our mouth with soap would be a minor thing compared to some of the things that were done in regards to those who didn't worship according to the dictates of the state religion during the Dark Ages, when 50 to 150 million people were killed in the name of Jesus, apparently, all because they did not worship the Trinity or honor Sunday, which are not even biblical doctrines. And furthermore, according to the Constitution, it tells us no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So therefore, why are we going to put people in power based on their beliefs? But do we make this a test, or is it how they uphold the Constitution, how they protect your freedoms, how they have protected your freedoms in time past? In this video, it's interesting, this video has so many comments on it saying, no king but Jesus, hallelujah, let's make Jesus king again, and everything like that. It is interesting how this is all coming to pass, and that someone is going to exercise some power that is very similar to the power that was exercised by the first beast in Revelation chapter 13, the church and state, when it was united, destroyed the saints of God, and made war with God's people. This is nothing new under the sun. It is the same thing that has been, and it will be the same thing again that will be. The image to the beast will force worship in a certain way, and those who fail to go along with it will be the outlaws of the land.
Recognition that these are the people that will contribute to social life in a way that's congruent with their peers, and also that's objectively good, right? So we want to make sure they're the ones that are in charge, essentially. And then you also want to make it easy for Christians to do Christian things. I mean, that's the main rationale given by courts for Sabbath laws. It is in our tradition, it is historical, but the main thing is we don't want Christians economically on Sundays to be overcome by non-Christians just because they want to worship the Lord, right? That's not a choice they should have to make. We want to make it very easy for and make it clear to everyone which Sabbath we're in favor of. That's the religion we want to be perpetuated. So that's just all over the place. You don't even have to get into the demographics per se, although it, as I already said, was overwhelmingly Protestant, or even the particular convictions of our elite kind of founders, the ones Washington onwards. That
we want to make it very clear what Sabbath we are in favor of, and what Sabbath would that be? What Sabbath would it be that they are in favor of? Is it the seventh-day Sabbath that God has ordained? I'll leave a study under this video for anybody who wants to check the truth and see some history with respect to the true Sabbath, and also the Bible and what it says with respect to the true Sabbath. Sunday is certainly not the Sabbath of our God. Regarding the government and the purpose of separation of church and state, which is in the Constitution, contrary to what many of these people are saying, James Madison told us this. He said, the purpose of separation of church and state is to keep forever from these shores the ceaseless strife that has soaked the soil of Europe in blood for centuries. Now, clearly, that is our history. That is James Madison. He was the editor of the Constitution of the United States. He basically put it into paper so that people would not be deceived. Again, as James Madison said, it was to keep forever from these shores the same bloodshed that was shed in Europe during the Dark Ages. Now, if we knew our history and we understood our history, we'd know why the founders put this separation of church and state in, to keep the church from obtaining power over the state so that they could enforce their doctrines by law, which is what they did. You see, Thomas Jefferson did say erecting the wall of separation between church and state is absolutely essential in a free society, just as the government always goes bad. And they want power, and they want to use that power, just as it says in Revelation chapter 12 and 13. And they get their power from the dragon, and they will exercise all the same power as the Roman Church did during the Dark Ages. But some people are trying to rewrite history, which has been clearly debunked. If anybody studies history, this historicist David Barron tries to say that all that Thomas Jefferson, some of the founders, wrote was actually not true, and there's a bunch of lies about them. But the reality is that this has been debunked. This is not true. But there are many people that are following their ways. For instance, here's Mike Johnson.
Jefferson clearly did not mean that metaphorical wall was to keep religion from influencing issues of civil government. To the contrary, it was meant to keep the federal government from impeding the religious practice of citizens. The founders wanted to protect the church from an encroaching state, not the other way around.
Well, according to James Madison, it was to keep forever from the shores of America what happened during the Dark Ages. And it was what happened because of what the church did in getting control over the state. Documented martyrs that were destroyed by the Roman Catholic Church. They would destroy entire nations who didn't accept the Trinity doctrine. They would destroy entire nations who didn't accept Sunday teaching. This is no new thing. And if David Barron was telling real history, he would be telling about what happened during these Dark Ages when the Roman Church had power over the state and what it was really about. Johnson told an audience at a December 2021 gathering that Barton's teachings, which are disputed by many historians, have had a profound influence on me and my work and my life and everything that I do. So why is Mike Johnson trying to get power? Why do these guys try to get power? Because they believe that the power is going to be used to enforce religious laws. And so they're getting in positions of power. Now, again, I want to bring you back to, this is Pastor Robert Jeffries. He's an advisor of Donald Trump. He has a very similar view to David Barton, and he is saying that that history is all skewed. I want you to hear what he has to say regarding that history.
That version of American history belongs in the same category as the story of George Washington and the cherry tree. It is an absolute myth.
He says it's an absolute myth, the separation of church and state. You know, when you really get down to it, you know where this all comes from and where this all leads. All roads lead to Rome. You see, if you look at Kenneth Copeland, you'll understand he's a very close friend of David Barton. But you'll also know that Kenneth Copeland is a very close friend of Pope Francis, and they've come together. And this is what's happening, is that apostate Protestantism is turning back to Rome. They are reuniting. There's a threefold union taking place. It is spiritualism. All the spiritualistic beliefs and doctrines that people are coming into can agree with most of what Rome is teaching, can agree with what most of apostate Protestant is teaching, because these doctrines all agree on the main ideas with respect to God and Sunday and paganism and all these other things. It's very easy to come together, and they are uniting together just as they united together during the Dark Ages, to persecute God's people one final time. History is about to repeat itself. There's no new thing under the sun. Please like, subscribe, and share, and also be sure to watch these videos next, and we'll see you guys in the next video.